Okay, so we'll speak about a few topics in Tevilas Keilim. Really, we'll go through all the issues that come up. We'll probably take 2 or 3 shiurim, but we'll do whatever we can today, as Hashem. So first, a very important general introduction, that there's 3 factors basically that factor in to the chiyuv of Tevilas Keilim when you buy something from a guy, whether or not it has to be toilet. The 3 issues are the material that it's made out of, the chiyuv tefillah from Keilim that are purchased from a guy are only if it's in the metal or the glass families. Otherwise, there's no chiyuv tefillah. If you buy a wooden cutting board, it's kli suda, it's purchased in a goyish store, that does not need to be toilet. There's no even chumrah to do it. In fact, it says you shouldn't, because why should you do it? The only thing is you made by mistake, make a brochah, and it's completely possible. So it has to be the material. The issue of the material is the first aspect of what would make it chayiv in tefillah or not. So again, it has to be either in the metal family or in the glass family, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Some of the questions that come up, whether or not it fits in. The second issue is the usage. You can have a metal folding chair. You could have a glass table. It's not going to be put maacholei in tefillah. It has to be kli suda. Kli suda means something that you eat from or that the food is cooked in. And then certain other things like storage containers and things like that are questionable. And again, we'll deal with some of those as well. So questions as far as usage is concerned, if it fits the criteria of kli suda. And the third is ownership. The chiyuv is only if a keli is purchased from a goy. It goes to the ownership of the goy to the ownership of the yid. If you have a keli and the goy borrows it, even if he trades it up, and therefore you're going to have to kasher it, it doesn't need to be toivel, only kasher. And if he uses it without trading it up to you, he doesn't need it. You don't need to kasher it, you don't need to toivel it, because he never owned it. It was your keli, even though he used it. Conversely, if you borrow a keli from a goy, you don't need to. You might need to kasher it before you use it, but you don't need to toivel it. Or if you're using it only for cold, you just need to wash it. You don't need to kasher it either. But it doesn't need to be toivel because it didn't transfer ownership from the goy to the yid, because you don't own it. You're just borrowing it. So then there's questions as far as what fits into these things. So the closest rule is like this: in order to be chayiv tefillah, it has to check all of these 3 boxes, right? So it has to be either in the metal or glass family. It has to fit the criteria of kli suda, and it has to be a clear thing that it's going from the guy's ownership to the yid's ownership. If you check all 3 boxes, then it's for sure maacholei in tefillah, then you toivel with a brochah. Generally speaking, and if it's missing one of these 3, any one of these 3, then it's chater legamri mitefillah. So you can have something just clearly kli suda, but if, like an example we gave before, if it's a wooden cutting board, doesn't matter, you don't have to toivel it at all. Or if you have something which could be glass and metal, but it doesn't fit the criteria of kli suda, like the glass table, because you're not meant to eat on it. Sometimes the food could fall on it, but that's not what it's meant for. So you're not going to toivel that. You're not going to toivel a corkscrew, because even that's not meant to touch the food. It's not kli suda. Something which is not, and therefore doesn't need to be toiveled at all, period. And then the same thing is something which, like the examples we gave before, which do not fit the criteria of ownership, the transfer of ownership. If you have a question in one of these 3, so then the general rule is going to be that it's toivel without a bracha, because you can't make a bracha misaf. Make a bracha lahako, and when you're saying, so therefore you're not maacholei in the bracha. When you're not maacholei in the bracha, you're not allowed to make the bracha because you're saying Hashem's name. So therefore, you will toivel it without a bracha. Now, generally, there should be a difference in this between metal and glass, because the consensus in the poskim is that metal keilim. There's shittus in the Rishonim, but the consensus halacha is that metal keilim, the chiyuv tefillah has been actually up. Pasuk speaks about toiveling in 6 types of metals, whereas glass, the Gemara says that you're obligated to toivel glass keilim because it has a certain characteristic, a certain similarity to metal, in that if it breaks, you could put it back into the kiln and reshape it, recast it. So because of that similarity, it's also maacholei in tefillah, but that is only midrabanan. So there should technically, usually there's a difference when you have a suffix. If something's midiraisa, you go to form, or something midarabani, you go to level. When it comes to this Indian, most of the time it's not going to be a difference, because it's more or less the concept or the idea of a davar sheyesh lo material, which means that you're able to do it. So go ahead and do it. In other words, if you have it, if there's a proximity, if there's a mikvah in the proximity, so then we don't apply generally the kind of rule of Safek Brachas Lahakol. So therefore, even when it comes to glass, a glass keli, when you have a suffix in one of these three boxes, whether or not it's mechuyev, it's going to usually be the same rule that you table bracha. Unless we're talking a situation where it's very difficult, the type of the keli which is very difficult to table. So then, of course, a glass keli is going to be the approach is going to be a little bit more lenient than if you're dealing with metal. So that's a close to Hakdama. I want to go straight off into talking now a few questions within each subject. If you don't mind, I'll take the questions, take your question after, if that's okay. Unless it's something to clarify that didn't make clear. But yeah, so we're going to talk about that. Different types of materials that, again, that are questionable whether or not they fit into, like we said, the metal or the glass families. So China, the base of the keli is cheres. Cheres is part of tefillah. Unglazed earthenware or clay is part of tefillah because it's not metal and it's not glass. That's a clear halacha. You don't have to table it at all, even if you purchase it from the even though it's made to eat from. But if it's mitzupa, if it's coated, let's say, with metal or with glass, so then it is mechuyev until the Gemara said you follow the coating. If it would be coated with metal from outside and inside, and with a bracha, coated with glass from the outside and inside, but without a bracha. So the question becomes when we're dealing with China is this an example of a cheres keli, which is coated, which is plated on the outside and on the inside with glass? So if it is, then it would be mechuyev until without a bracha. So the argument to claim that it isn't, and there are some communities that are making they don't play with China, is that this is not what it means that you have a keli which is coated or plated with glass. That means that the glass coating, the glass plating has to have substance. It has to be like kind of almost like a keli for itself, on top of the cheres. Over here, you have a coating, a glaze, which, first of all, half the glaze melts into the cheres, melts into the clay. And maybe it's just for niceness or to be shiny. If it doesn't, if it's not here for function, if it's just here for niceness, so then we don't follow the coating. We don't follow the plate. So that's the argument that since it's so thin, that's kind of like a raya that it's not really there for function. It's just there for niceness, and therefore you kind of ignore it, and therefore it's a regular earthenware, regular klicharis. And it's part of mitzvah legami. That's the argument for those that claim that you don't need a type. In most places, they do table it, of course, without a bracha. No one tables it with a bracha because even if it is considered plated with glass, it's still going to be tabled without a bracha. Because the argument is that it is for function, even though it's not very thin, but it's there to make that the keli shouldn't. First of all, makes the keli stronger. If you have just unglazed, then it would nick very easily. Second, it touches anything, or right away it would be much more brittle. And when you eat from it, the food would get absorbed inside of it, it would become much more disgusting. You wouldn't be able to clean it afterwards. So the purpose of the coating of the glaze is for function. Mela, we treat it like cheres keli that's coated with glass and it's available without a bracha. That's what most people assume. Conversely, you have the opposite. You can have a metal keli, which the base of the keli is made out of metal, let's say iron or something like that, or steel, and it has some sort of coating on top of it. So you can have, for example, an enamel coating. Those are like, if you ever see like the bright colored pots, white or red or blue, like that. So that coating, it's the same kind of coating that you have on some of the stove tops, that white coating. Sometimes it's black. That's called enamel. So it's enamel, and the place art, they approach the enamel coating as if it's cheres or the suffix cheres. So we assume that it's some sort of material which is questionable, at least whether it's mechuyev and tefillah. So we have here a metal keli, which if it wouldn't be coated with this enamel, so then it would be mechuyev and tefillah. It's a regular pan, pot, whatever it is. But because it has this coating, so this could kind of detract from the kiyuv. Now here, it's not going to detract the gamma. Even if it's coated the inside and the outside, it would still be chayiv and tefillah, just would be taken away from the bracha. So that's not what the maskana is. That if you have a keli that's enameled, at least on the inside, and koshkein on the outside and on the inside, so then it's going to be the mitzvah of that coating, mitzvah that material of that coating, that's going to take away from the at least from the bracha aspect, and you'll have to table that without a bracha. Similarly, if it's coated with a non-stick kind of coating, the Teflon coating, that actually is going to segue us into the plastic. That's also a material. It's like a plasticky kind of material, which also most probably is a type of material which is not mechuyev in tefillah. So it's the same issue almost as the enamel coated pots. So therefore, any kind of pot pan, usually it's in a pan, but it could be also pots. And we'll speak later, Mitzvah Shem, about the mini appliances like the grills and stuff like that. Generally, those things are coated with this enamel, this kind of non-stick coating. Any such pot or pan will be toivel without a brochah because of that coat. And again, that coating, even if it's only on the inside, not on the outside, it still functions because it's coated on the inside. So therefore, we give some sort of credence to that coating, and that's going to take away from the bracha. So all those types of things are going to be covered without a bracha. Now, let's talk about plastic in general. So what should be the svara that plastic is mechuyev in tefillah if it's not metal or glass? So the argument here is some place can posit this argument that plastic, just like the Gemara said regarding glass, that's mechuyev in tefillah. Why? Because if it breaks, you put it back in the fire, you can recast it. So plastic is the same thing. You could put it in the fire and you could reshape it in the fire. So because of that characteristic, it would fit, so to speak, the glass family, and it would likewise be mechuyev in tefillah. That's the argument to say that plastic is mechuyev in tefillah. The counter argument is that even though that's what the Gemara says, why glass is mechuyev in tefillah, that doesn't, just because something else also has that property, that doesn't mean that that's also going to be mechuyev. You could kind of, first of all, this is an argument that some of the place can bring down, is that even if the logic is the same, but whatever was included in the original Torah was included, and because this didn't exist back then, so it was not included, so therefore, even if the logic is the same, it just wasn't included, so therefore, you're not included to total such a type of material. You have endless, a lot of types of martial like kidney or some pesa, right? So with potatoes, if it's some place that argue that it would be usher, those that it would be the cloud exer of kidneys, and the counter argument is, even though most probably the arguments, the reasons that were given for kidneys happen would apply to potatoes, because you can make potato powder, potato starch and stuff like that. The reasons do apply. Apple became lucky for us. It was not. They didn't have it back then, and therefore it wasn't included, right? So that's one reason. What's one argument? Another argument is that it could be that that's not the only reason why glass is mechuyev. Glass is the general halachas of tumah. Glass is from sand, so it's within the general. It's a material which is b'chlal tumah. Now the rules, it's more similar to cheres. So what type of halachas? What type of tumah is it? Is it mateches? Is it cheres? They have different klalim how to makabel tumah. Talking about classic kind of tumah, not tumas akum. But the place can always compare. This is actually one of the questions at the heart of many issues is how much do we compare the halachas of Tevilas Keilim that you purchase from a guy, the classical tumah, and do we learn, or do we say it's two separate areas of halacha and we don't apply one to the other? So the other argument is that because this is a synthetic material, this is nothing to do with the classic laws of tumah and tara. So therefore, it's obviously not bichlal the halachas that it needs to be told. Glass generally is compared to cheres. Now cheres from these halachas of toivel and keilim from a guy, they're excluded. And glass is because glass has a certain property that it's compared to metal, so that's why it's included in this case. But you can't take from there something which is a synthetic material. Now there's a different svara why to be machalik that akopanim metal and glass has certain chashivos, mashenking plastic. Akopanim for various svaras that we just said over, majority of the place you hold that plastic does not need. Some go even as far as saying that you're not supposed to toivel, like mentioned before, something which is clearly putter, you're not supposed to toivel, it says in Shulchan Aruch. So some go as far as saying that you're not supposed to toivel plastic. That's not really generally ongenumen. What's ongenumen is that it's putter, but I'm not going to tell you love rough. That's generally what's ongenumen when it comes to the plastics. Again, this is all assuming that it fits the criteria of Suda, and it fits the criteria of what's considered purchase from a guy, etc. So let's talk a little bit about now related to this subject, but it starts to go into the next area of disposable. So this already has to do a little bit with usage, with some of the usage questions. You have a disposable aluminum pan, right? Or the emphasis, let's talk about the general disposable. In other words, one-time use keilim. You buy a keilim, it's kli suda, it's made out of a material which is included in tefillah. So that's the classical case will be like an aluminum pan, right? So if it's made out of plastic or disposable cup, so it doesn't really go into the whole question because it's plastic, right? So we're talking about a material which, for argument's sake, for right now, is mechuyev in tefillah. And so it's the question of disposable. So it's assumed halacha that because it's disposable, because it's meant for one-time use, so you don't have to tell you why. Because there's Mishnayos and Halacha and Rambam that something which is a one-time use, it doesn't have the gather of a keli. If it's only meant to be used once, then you throw it out. So it doesn't have the same keli. It doesn't have the gather of a keli. So therefore, it's not mechuyev in tefillah, but it's not really a kli which was purchased from a guy. It's a Mishnayos and to this effect. So maybe the same thing over here. Buy a pan, and use it once, then you're going to throw it out. So it doesn't really have together of a keli, and that's why it's pater from tefillah. And the question becomes, that's the accepted argument for a one-time use case. The question becomes, what happens when you want to reuse it? A lot of times you buy the pan, and depending on how you use it, so sometimes you use it, it's very greasy, whatever it is, it doesn't pay to wash it. You wash it, by the time you finish washing it, you make a hole in it, it doesn't work, you throw it out. And sometimes, so it's barely up to a cookie you used for it, whatever it is, it's clean. You just have to rinse it off. So you want to reuse it. So the question is, if you want to reuse it, now already it's more of a question if you would be mechuyev in tefillah. So there are those that say that in such a case, even though the general consensus is that the disposable keilim one-time use, it does not need to be toivel. But if you want to reuse it, so then you'll have to toivel it. And by the way, it's important to mention over here that there is some sort of myth, mistaken notion that most probably came from here, that you could use a keli one time without toiveling, you get like one free use before you toivel it. There's no such a thing. Okay? Most probably, again, I can't know for sure, but most probably that mistake came from this halacha. You have your halacha that a keli which is designed to be used for one-time use does not need to be toiveled. So from there, most probably people learned the mistake that for one time you don't need to toivel. That's the reason you don't need to toivel the pan, because you don't need to toivel for one time. So if I buy a pot and I didn't get a chance to bring it to the mixer, I could use it once and then afterwards I'll bring it. That's a big mistake. If it's a real keli, it's mechuyev in tefillah, you have to toivel before the first time you use it. The answer is that it's not a real keli, right? So if you want to reuse it, some argue, then you would have to toivel it. And according to that, you would probably have to, if you know that you at least plan on reusing it, then you have to toivel it before the first use. Because you plan on reusing it, it's a real keli. It's not such a disposable one-time use kind of keli. And therefore you would have to toivel it before you use it even the first time. Because there's no such thing that you could use a real keli one time before you toivel it. That is the machmirim that hold that if you plan on reusing it, you would have to say. There is strong argument to justify reusing, but again, here already is a lot of places who hold that you would have to toivel it if you plan on reusing it more than once. Okay, but there is strong justification. You could say it's even a machlekes, I guess you could word it that way. That those that hold that even if you want to reuse it, you still wouldn't have to toivel it. They bring a different Mishnah, different halacha and Rambam, that if you make a keli out of, let's say you take a pumpkin or something and you hollow it out and you use it as a keli, not that you want to use it once and throw it away. You want to use it until it's not going to last for very long, but until you get the use out of it. And once it breaks apart, then you'll stop using it. That also doesn't have the garb of a keli, and it's not the gabel tumah for those halachas. So someone is saying it's the same thing over here. It's a clear it's not because it's only designed for one-time use. That's a different part. Right? You can have even a very strong keli, very strong material that can last for a long time, but you only made it into keli for one-time use. This is a different part. This is that if the way the keli is designed is it's not going to last very long. So then it also is not considered a keli, and therefore you wouldn't have to table it according to this argument. So someone is saying the same thing over here, those closed pans. If you use it once, but use it twice, maybe after a few times washing, it's gonna get already a hole, you're not gonna be able to. So that's the argument to say that you'll be allowed to reuse it. I saw a second argument, interesting argument, why you should be allowed to reuse it without tabling. And this part of a force, Maacholei makes this point. It kind of like this, that when you purchased it from the guy, you don't know exactly if you're going to reuse it or not. Depends what happens. Depends what you use it for. You use it for some saucy, greasy chicken or something, so you're not going to end up reusing it. If you use it for something dry, I don't know, you heat up some cookies in there or something, you might want to reuse it. Depends what you don't know the shas you're purchasing. It's kind of it's a game time decision. After you use it, you're going to decide, do I want to reuse it or it's not worth it? So it comes out that when you're making that decision of whether or not it's actually a keli, a reusable keli or not, that's going to be made not the shas you're purchasing it from a guy. Shas purchasing a guy was made as a disposable keli, and it could very well be that's how you're going to use it. Okay. The truth of the matter is how it was made doesn't really matter. The place will say very clear that when we want to determine if something's consideredlisuda or not, that's determined by the end user. In other words, you can have a scissor that was manufactured to cut the cardboard, but if you say, hey, wait, then I could use this as a poultry scissor, then when you buy it, you have to table it before you use it as a poultry scissor, right? Or you could buy a poultry scissor and say, wait, I have no intention of using it as a poultry scissor. I'm going to cut cardboard with it. So there's no need to table, right? Before you're cutting your cardboard. So it goes by the end user. That's not really determined by the manufacturer. But when you're purchasing it, you're kind of neutral about it. You don't know what it's going to be. So it's really only becomes a keli, so to speak, in the Yid Rishos. So it doesn't have that halacha of a keli that was purchased from the guy to the Yid. So a third point is, and again, this only applies to the aluminum pans, is that there are poskim who hold that aluminum is b'chal pater from tefillah, because there are 6 metals that are mentioned in the pasuk. So what about all the other metals? You look at a table of all the elements, many metals. So what about all the other ones? So some, by the way, are alloys. So that's clear if it goes by the majority. So for example, steel is not an element, right? But it's mostly iron. So therefore, it goes by right. So that's for sure Maacholei and Tevilas Midaraisa. Stainless steel pot, that's in the gather of a clean chayes. But if you have a different metal, like aluminum, is a good example. It's a different metal. It's a different element. So sometime now, that Torah says six metals, but it's my berry, all kind of metals. So all metals are Maacholei and Tevilas. There's another argument that no, Torah, it's only these 6. What about all the other metals? So some will say that it's the same like glass, right? Just like the Gemara says, glass is Maacholei midarabanan because of that characteristic that it has. So too the other metals, they also share that characteristic. And some want to say that it could be pater legami along the lines of the story that we watched before with the plastic. That it could be that it's b'chlal muftach from all of them of tumah, right? That's not nasim in achol. So therefore, there are such places in the whole like this, and therefore there's an additional argument to bolster, or at least be malamet sus on those that are reused pans multiple times without table. We mentioned before, when it comes to usage,lisuda, so what's considered b'shullisuda is something that you eat from it, cutlery, plates, a glass, right? You drink from it, you eat from it, or that you cook it, that the food gets ready in it. So pots and pans and all these things are Maacholei and Tevilas. Something which is meant for food storage, that means that Not that the food's being cooked in it, and not that you're eating from it. Just that, let's say you have a canister, a glass canister that you're going to store sugar or something, right? Or flour. So that is a question of the poskim. So again, generally the rule is going to be that you'll table without a bracha. Okay? If it's very difficult to table, so then it's made out of glass, more reason to be makel. Another issue, which is something which is a question of the type of usage of epistemological suda, is something which is meant for food, but the food is not yet ready to eat. In other words, it's only used in the preparation of food, in the initial preparation of food, before the food is edible. The muscle of Shulchan Aruch is a sheiket's knife. So there, the halacha is that it's table without a bracha. And generally, we apply that, even though in the poskim, there are those that make you look in between, let's say, a sheiket's knife, which could be used for something else, even that's ready to eat, versus something which can only be used at a stage where the food is not yet ready to eat. Like, let's say, a mixer, let's say that mixes the flour to make bread or something like that, right? So again, it could only really be used, or a meat grinder, it could only be used for food at a stage that it's not yet ready to eat. More sorry to be makel legamri. But generally, under normal circumstances, what we take on is that anything that's in the initial stages is meant for food, but it's only in the initial stages, and therefore, before the food is ready to eat. So then it's also table without a bracha. Whenever, by the way, we say table without a bracha, the preferred way is that if you have a different caterer for sorting to be covered, you tell them together and you make a bracha, and the bracha goes for both. I say table without a bracha means if you don't have any other keli, so then don't table this without a bracha. Let's say, I know people never think about this, you buy a Snapple. So now they make the Snapple bottles out of plastic. Not too long ago, they used to make it out of glass, right? You're buying it from a corner store, you're buying it from a guy, and then you're drinking from it, you're using it. How do you drink from it? Using the keli that was purchased from a guy, and how are you drinking from it? How are you using it without tefillah? So to be able to use it, and you say, or like a pickle jar, you're using it, you're taking one pickle by another pickle. So there's a bunch of svaras that are given why that's okay. So one argument that's given is that it's not called using. If you want to take a drink and you pour it into the glass, so then it's called you using it. If something's coming inside the glass. So what do you look for to do? Let's say food is put. Wow, it's an important halach I should have mentioned. Well, let's say food is put in a pot, it was never touched. So it doesn't trade up the food. You're supposed to, you're mechuyev to take it out, right? But everybody agrees that even if you were, you weren't careful and you should have been more careful to tell you, whatever it is, doesn't matter. It doesn't trade up the food bidiyat. Yeah? If you put it in a pot, you're mechuyev to remove it as soon as you realize, yeah? So removing the food, there's nothing wrong. The food was already put into the container. The food's not ausser, you just have to remove it. So what are you? You're removing it. So you're removing it in a way that you're drinking it, right? Or you're removing it slowly, pickle by pickle. You didn't put it in. You didn't put in the pickles, right? So you're removing pickle whenever you want to take. You take one pickle. It's not called using it. That's one time. Another time is that you didn't intend, when you purchased it, you didn't intend to purchase the container. You're purchasing pickles. It's given to you in a container. So the thing is not cool that you purchase the keli from a guy. Now, what happens if you want to reuse it? So that basically everybody agrees. You're not mechuyev when you buy pickles immediately to open it up, take all the pickles out, and then transfer it into some other container that you have it inside, right? You can do that. First can say even further, even if you took out, and then you realize you took out too much, you want to put back, even that you could do, because it's also not called, you're putting it back in, but it's not called using. It's the same pickle that was there. By mistake, you took it out. What if you finish the pickle jar, now you want to wash it out and reuse it? So here already sometime, now you would have to table it if you want to reuse it. And there are still some that say that even in this case, you wouldn't really have to. The kind of is, along the lines you mentioned before, that you didn't really purchase the keli from the guy. You were purchasing pickles. This container is buckled to the food. Bring a din in Meiser Sheni, you could purchase food, right? You're only allowed to purchase food. But if it comes in a container, you can purchase it from the container. You don't have to pay separate money for the container. It's holding the food, it's buckled to the food. You're not really purchasing the container. Now, you finish what's inside of it. You decided to use it. So it's kind of almost like along the lines we said before, it's becoming a keli when you're deciding not to use it. That's the limit source, that's the argument that someone be miyasher to be able to reuse it without toiling. But it's better for sure. We're talking about glass, or metal, whatever kind of container. Definitely the proper thing would be in such a case to toil it if you want to reuse it. Now, if let's say you want to give a matana, you want to give a gift to someone, a food utensil, you go into the store and you buy a fruit bowl or something, right? A glass fruit bowl or a pot, whatever it is, right? You want to give a gift. You're staying by someone's house, so you want to give them this gift. But you don't want to do much after. It's like you're giving a gift and it's like halfway, because they still even can't use it. They still have to schlep. So you want to, it should be a more complete gift that you're turbulent. So that's a problem. Why is that a problem? I'll ask you, I'll pose you a different question. You'll understand yourself why that's a problem. I have an idea. When Carol and Cord or Weinstein's is having a slow day, right? So in the middle of the summer, they're having a lot of traffic. They do a service to the customers. They'll pre-toivel everything. They'll stand there, he'll toivel everything. As soon as he gets it, before he puts it on the shelf, he'll toivel all the glass and metal containers or keilim, whatever it is. Yeah? This way, when you buy it, you don't have to toivel it. It's a good idea. Why don't they do that? Why is it? Because the place can say, it's a maacholei in the place, but I'm going to component better, right? That wouldn't help. He can't toivel it. He doesn't need a toivel it. Goes hand in hand. He wouldn't need a toivel it, even though he owns it. And let's say he bought it from a goyish company. So it was a goyish company, and he's a yid, and we purchased it, and it's klisuda. So why doesn't he have to toivel it? The answer is because he doesn't have it. The Torah is klisuda, right? He has it. It's called klisuda. Now, if he's not going to use it for food, so there's no chiyuv and tefillah altogether until. But let's say someone wants to, let's say, borrow it from the store and use it. Okay, we don't have that here made. The question, the way it's posed in the nice Shulchan Aruch is, let's say you go to Yiddish store owner and you want to borrow a keli, you're at a party and you want to borrow a keli from him. So would you have to toivel it or not? So some say you don't have to. Why? Because a yid does not own it now as klisuda. The yid who owns it, which is the storekeeper, it's klisuda, right? Klisuda is not klisuda. It goes by the end user. So until somebody purchases it as a klisuda, it's not going to be mechuyev. So it wouldn't help to toivel it. Not mechuyev in that case, and it wouldn't help. So therefore, al derech zeh, if I buy it from the store and I plan on giving it away, what's the difference if I plan on selling it or if I plan on giving it away? It's the same thing, right? The point is, I'm not the end user. And I have it as klisuda, something which I don't plan on using, which I plan on giving away, which I plan on selling away. So mamela, it's premature for me to toivel. It won't help necessarily, according to some place. So therefore, that's why I can't just do it now. What is an answer that some place can suggest? Some place can suggest what you could do is like this. Let's say, before we get to the actual suggestion, let's say you have a keli and wasn't yet toivel, and I'm passing by the mitzvah, whatever it is. I figure, you know what? Let me do a favor. I'll take it for you, and I'll table it for you. You're not there. If you instruct me, you make me a shliach, right? But let's say I want to do it without you didn't ask me, you didn't instruct me to do it. Can I do that? Can I take your keli? The answer is, yeah. So I could do a favor for you. You don't have to appoint me, be memaning me as a shliach. I'm automatically a shliach because I know that you would want me to do this, right? So Mamela, I could do that. I could tell you that on your behalf. A keli that you own, it's klisuda, I could tell you that on your behalf without you necessarily telling me to do it and memaning me as a shliach to do it. But the point is, you have to at least own it as the end user, and therefore it has to be considered klisuda. So what's the answer? So the answer is, let someone acquire it on your behalf. Someone will pick up the keli, okay, on your behalf. That's also Zachon on the fun of, right? So now you own the keli, and now I can title it on your behalf. Now, why can't I do that? Why do I have to have somebody else? So the premise is that when I'm purchasing it, I pick it up, I purchase it on your behalf, then I don't need to do that whole process with somebody else lifting it up on your behalf. But usually when I buy it, even if I plan on giving it to you, you don't own it yet, right? I could change my mind. I'm not ripping you off. If it breaks, I don't have to pay you, reimburse you. It's not yours, right? I plan on giving it to you, but until I actually gave it to you, until you were claiming it, it's not yours. So therefore, it's not considered yet that you own it, the end user, as Klisuda. So that's why it would be necessary for someone to actually acquire it on your behalf. If when I'm purchasing it, I am claiming it on your behalf, then it would be okay for me to do. But then the shas I'm purchasing it, a mamish has to be claiming it, have to pick it up on your behalf. If I just buy it with planning on giving it to you, that's not good enough. Then in order for me to title it, I would have to ask someone else to lift it up and be claiming it on your behalf. But that's an answer that's given by many. There are those that are not so comfortable with it. From the Zalman I saw wrote down in his name that he wasn't comfortable because who says you're going to want to keep it? Maybe you're going to want to return it. So we don't know for sure that it's considered inspired until the person who plans on using it actually has it. So okay, but I think a lot of people rely on those that say that you could do that. It's definitely not always gehalten to just in other words buy it and then title it and then give it to the person and say you don't need to title it now. The thing would be in such a case that the person has to re-title without a bracha. But according to some poskim, Chodesh and others, that was pocket from tefillah until you were actually titled. So therefore, titling it at that point didn't help. So you would have to re-title it then without a bracha. Without a bracha, because others hold that it is machuyev, so therefore it's laying off without suffix, so therefore you would have to title without a bracha. Let's talk a little bit about appliances. Let's say the grill, the hot water urn, stuff like that. So people are very serious about titling it, electric, this, that. There is an oft-quoted svara that doesn't apply to most of the appliances that we're talking about. The ones that I named, let's say the hot water urn, the grill, or the waffle maker, wouldn't apply to that. It would apply to something like maybe an immersion blender or something. That since it's made, what the plan is that it's used only when it's mechuber lakarka. It only really has a function when it's mechuber lakarka, because you plug it in, and that's considered mechuber lakarka because the electricity is grounded or it's plugged into the wall, whatever it is. So therefore, if something is made, and when it's made, the plan is that it's only going to be used, and most of the time it's going to be used is when it's mechuber lakarka. So then when it comes to the regular dinim of tumah and tara, it's not considered that it's makabel tumah. And those that, according to those poskim that say that if you learn Keilim that are purchased from a goy, from the classical dinim of tumah and tara, based on that, we would say that such a Keilim is farther from tefillah. But again, even if, first of all, it's not ongoing by the rest of it. This far is what Machalkas Yaakov, but it's not ongoing by the rest of the poskim. And even according to him, it only applies to something which only has a function when it's plugged in, like the immersion blender or something like that. Something else which, like the hot water, which holds the water, nothing to do. It cooks it when it's plugged in. When it's not plugged in, it just holds the water, but it means it has a proper function. When it's not plugged in, to that it wouldn't apply. You would never say it. So, but either way, anyway, it's not all good. It's a story that I think some of you are familiar with that. You probably heard of something along those lines before, but it's not all good. Ramesh also has a part, which is also not all good by the rest of the poskim. He learns that the electrical part of the keli is considered a different keli, and therefore you only have to table the regular, the parts, let's say that holds the food, not the electrical part. You leave that part out of the mikveh. You could immerse the keli, you could table the keli, let's say, put it down, the electrical part, let's say on the bottom of the urn, whatever it is on the top basically, and you don't have to put that part in the water. It's two separate kelim. Let's say the end of the first keli, the bottom of the first keli is not going to be immersed, it is not going to be submerged in the water. So that's based on starim, it's not a chatzitza. Maybe it's Rabbi. Basically, the scholars of chatzitza, he says that you don't have to worry about that either, and therefore that part doesn't have to go in. So even that's not on the, but even he holds that it has to be done. He just holds that you don't, that part could be left sticking out, but also that's not on the. It's assumed the halacha that it's really one keli, and therefore, just like let's say you have a knife that has a wooden handle. So is anyone going to say you only have to touch the metal part, not the wood? Because it's only if the toilet it's out the metal blade. If it would be made out of wood, it wouldn't be mechuyev in tefillah. So therefore, I only have to stick in the metal blade. That's not true, right? It's one keli, and if it's one keli, the whole keli has to go in. That's even worse. In other words, if you don't have the whole keli, if the wooden handle of a knife, part of that is sticking out of the mikveh, that's even much worse. If you have, let's say, the whole keli submerged, and let's say you have a chatzitza on the metal part of the blade. Let's say you have a piece of the glue left on the blade. Because that's a chatzitza, it's minimum chatzitza, right? But it's a tefillah. So minimum chatzitza, there's a miyot, a machfid, and ain't a machfid, and right? So in certain instances, there's certain types of chatzitzas that are not, ma'akev b'diavad. But if the entire keli is not table, then there was no tefillah there altogether, and even the wood part, right? Because that's one keli. So the maskana is that the whole keli has to be table, even the electrical part. It's electric. So usually most kind of kelim, if it doesn't have, let's say, like a digital screen or something like that, just the wires, just the electrical things. So those are not going to, obviously can't be used when it's wet. But once if you leave it to dry out for a few days, then you could use it afterwards. But whatever the case is, I mean, the fact that it can't be terrible, there is some substance to that argument that it can't be terrible, because there are some Rishonim that learn that Tevilah, they learn it from the din that if you actually put food in it, it doesn't trape up the cake, doesn't trape up the food. So they learn that it's like, let's say a mezuzah on a house. It's a mitzvah, it's a chiyuv. What if you don't have a mezuzah on the house? Let's say there's no, you don't have a mezuzah, so there's an isser on going into the house, no isser on going into the house. You have a chiyuv, you have a mitzvah to put a mezuzah up before you go into the house. So you have a chiyuv to travel something. And what's if not? So then there's no isser of using it without the tefillah. But there's such a sheet in the return, but it's not on the halacha. So therefore, that argument that it's electrical and it's going to ruin, so then don't buy that keli. If it's not going to ruin, then don't buy it. Okay. Now, is there any heter? So there's two. It's possible heterim, but they're not really practical. So one possible heter is there is a din. If you have a keli and that was purchased from a guy, so it would be mechuyev in tefillah, but then you break it. And then a yid repairs it. So if it was made unusable, so then the fact that it previously was a keli, that's gone. And now when it was repaired by the yid, so it became a keli by the yid, so therefore it doesn't have the din of a keli that was purchased from a guy. So if you would take apart this keli and make it unusable in such a way that it can only be repaired by a proper craftsman, so then you would be applying that concept, and that would be acceptable. But most of the time, taking out the plug, that's not gonna do the trick, right? It's still a functioning. First of all, it doesn't require a woman to put it back together. And second of all, it's still a functioning keli. You could still use the water, and it's not going to cook the water, but you can still put water in it, right? You'd have to disassemble the whole entire keli, which is not a practical thing, basically. Huh? A grill? Again, taking out the plug wouldn't be enough. If you disassemble the whole thing, then it could be. I'm saying, well, that's the cloud. And I can't talk because I don't know. I mean, what parts? But I think that's the cloud. There's a little bit of a misconception about that. That kilo, like you take out a screw and then you put the screw back in, and now it's considered you made it, and then first of all, it was still usable even without the screw, and even if it wasn't usable, but it wasn't the kind of repair that it required a woman to do. So therefore, that doesn't help. A different Eitzah is borrowed from a din. Let's say there's a din in Shulchan Aruch that what happens if you didn't table the keli before Shabbos, you want to use the keli on Shabbos. So there's two Eitzahs that are given. So one is that you make believe that you're filling up to drink. Really it's actually tabling it. That's a whole question if you could actually do that, because you go into the mikvah water, no one's gonna most probably that doesn't work. And the other answer is that you give it to a goy b'matana, and then you borrow it from the goy. Because we said before that if you borrow the keli from a goy, it doesn't need to be toivel. The goy owns it. It's only when it's transferred from the goy to the yid. So the problem with that is that the Taz writes that that only works for Shabbos. Once a Shabbos, you have to toivel. Why? Because he points to the din of a mashkin. That if a yid takes a mashkin from a goy, lends money to the goy, he takes a mashkin from a goy, so you can use it without because it wasn't purchased on the goy, it's still the goy's key. The second, some say that you could use it, yeah? But the second you realize that the goy doesn't intend to pay you back, in other words, he intends to leave the mashkin by you as payment, then you must leave the title. Because now you own it. So once the guy realizes, hey, you can take it for a Shabbos, hey, you took it for a day. Usually you borrow a keli, so you give the guy 24 hours to bring it back. Not going to be knocking on his door, where's my keli? 5 minutes ago I gave it, right? But if a couple of days pass, right, and a long time passes, you see, you're not getting back the keli. So Yana Matana, the guy gave me. He didn't really intend to give it to me, and he's keeping it for himself, right? Once the guy realizes that, then it's considered that it's owned by you. So therefore, it doesn't help at this point anymore. It doesn't have the gadget. You're just borrowing a keli from a guy anymore. So therefore, the Taz kindness, this doesn't work long term. So you wouldn't be able to do that either over here. It's not really a good answer. You have to do like we said. If it's a kind of keli that's clearly going to ruin, then don't. If it's a commercial type of a thing, and you have to discuss it with a Rav, by commercial types of kelim that are very, very big, and this is other studim sometimes to rely on. But otherwise, you're just purchasing a kelim, so then you would have to buy something that either it says in it that it's manufactured by a Yiddish company, it doesn't need title, or now Brochah, we have a lot of such kind of kelim like that, or buy a kelim that's not going to ruin. Now, even electrical one, if you're scared some water is going to go on it, so first of all, you don't have to toivel it 3 times and leave it in the water for half an hour, right? First of all, you only have to toivel it once. But while there's no market for toiveling something 3 times, we don't have enough time to discuss it. I saw in Irgun Sefer, beautiful Sefer, Tevilas Keilim. So when the Torah over there tries to be miyasher this idea, this notion that some people have of toiveling it 3 times, it says to me, it brings up why the truth is, why Nashim toivel 3 times? Again, there's no requirement of the halacha, but it says 3 times in the Torah, the Harten, the Taher, it says make Yisrael 3 times. There's Ramazim to this idea of doing it 3 times. So in Mela, you have a Heskas Ari, do something 3 times. There's some kind of a vart like that. It's not a halachic requirement. You have to toivel something 3 times. So therefore, listen, if you can do it, do it. But if you're worried it's going to move, too much water is going to go in, and then it's not going to be able to dry out properly, so then Zikr, such as saying, or you're rushing, whatever it is, you could toivel at once. And also, if you also want to make sure that less water goes in, so you could dip your hand in the mikveh, and then you could cover that area, which again is not really going to be a chatzitza, unless you manage like holding it really, really tight. Okay, I wanted to talk about one other Indian, but we ran out of time. So.
Yeah. During COVID, and I don't know if you did right.
Yeah.